We'll just start slow and allow more people to join as they come. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Mohamad Alkhouli. I'm an interventional cardiologist at Mayo Clinic in Rochester. I also serve on the Minnesota chapter of the ACC Board of Governors, and I'm delighted to have both my mentor and my friends, Dr. Holmes from Mayo Clinic. I don't think Dr. Holmes needs any introduction. He's a known legend to all of us. We'll also have Dr. Ben Hibbert from University of Ottawa Heart Institute. He's going to talk to us today about how to do impactful research using limited resources. And Ben is a veteran of Ottawa. He's done all of his work there, starting from medical school through his PhD and clinical scientist program, and now an interventional cardiologist with really high volume of everything, of coronary structural interventions and research output. And we thought it will be a nice opportunity to start with a little bit of a discussion about the DOREMI trial that Dr. Hibbert has just published in the New England Journal of Medicine as a pretty unique trial. I think I was telling Ben that the way this trial was done deserves a paper on its own, because it was designed, led by trainees and mentor with a very, very limited budget. I think I'll let Ben decide to tell you what the budget is, but I think maybe we'll start with that. We'll give you a little bit of an overview about how that worked out, and then work it back from there. And please feel free to. We'd like to make this as much interactive as we can. So in the chat box, just type in any question that comes to mind, and then we'll try to go through them after the short presentation, which should take about 10-15 minutes. Thank you, David and Ben, for joining us tonight.
Great to be here with you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank the ACC Minnesota chapter for hosting this, and Dr. Alkhouli and Holmes for inviting me to talk about it. And the topic today is conducting research with limited resources. And so just to kind of break the talk down, I'm going to give you an example of a project that we recently did. And I'm going to talk about what we found from a system standpoint that has helped us to become successful in kind of a low resource environment to be productive. So as Dr. Alkhouli alluded to, we recently completed the Capital DOREMI trial, published in the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm going to start by giving a shout out to my trainees because they really are the stars of the show. So this is Dr. Rebecca Matthews. She actually just joined us on staff as a critical care cardiologist, and Dr. Pietro DeSanto, who is an interventional fellow and a PhD candidate currently at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute. And so all of this started with Rebecca and I rounding when she was a first-year resident. We were in the intensive care unit. We had a patient that was in cardiogenic shock, and we felt that they needed inotropes. And we were deciding whether to use dobutamine or milrinone. And Rebecca asked, how do you decide what to use? And we discussed some of the physiologic parameters, some of the pharmacology. And I said to her, I am unaware of any significant data that guides us in choosing the best therapy for the patient. And so Rebecca had a really keen interest in critical care. And so we decided to start by doing a systematic review and meta-analysis of all of the data that was out there. And what we found out when we did that is that, this is all observational randomized data. There was only 36 patients in randomized trials of milrinone versus dobutamine, despite the fact that this was these were both commonly used agents, and there was clinical equipoise. And so we decided to do a randomized clinical trial. And so 3 years ago, we started designing DOREMI. Rebecca was the resident lead. This is actually her resident research project. We designed a randomized trial blinded to both physicians and patients. And we had the hypothesis that milrinone would reduce the composite outcome of all-cause mortality, resuscitated cardiac arrest, need for transplant or MCS, MI, stroke, or need for renal replacement therapy. And we designed a protocol where the physicians could be blinded, the nurses were aware of which drugs the patients were on, and we titrated drugs using a standardized scale. We randomized 192 patients over 3 years, 96 patients per arm. We had sub-randomization based on left ventricular dominant or right ventricular dominant cardiogenic shock. And as was published in the New England, no difference in the primary composite outcome between milrinone and dobutamine of those aforementioned composite outcomes. And so in conclusion, The hypothesis was refuted. We did not identify a significant advantage of milrinone over dobutamine. And there was no difference, I'm not showing it here today, in any of the important secondary outcomes, biochemical markers of resuscitation, heart rate, blood pressure, VIS score. It did not matter what you gave these patients. And so selection of inotrope can reasonably be based on physician comfort and response to therapy. And so Rebecca presented this at the American Heart Association in the Resuscitation Symposium. She got best abstract. And of course, it was published in the New England. And what Dr. Alkhouli alluded to, and what I'm particularly proud of, you can see here, I've highlighted and bolded the names of all of the authors that were trainees and participated in the design, recruitment, filling out case reports, chasing down blood samples. So 22 authors, 14 who were trainees while we did this trial. And we designed this project to be productive. And so we designed it so we could collect all of the data to get more information. And so we have a number of subpapers that are coming out, looking at different important questions in cardiogenic shock that we're going to be able to answer with this data set. And we did this trial on a budget of $25,000. So we had an internal grant, and a large portion of that budget was actually spent on food, basically providing education to the nurses on what the protocol looked like, how to randomize patients, how to titrate drugs. And so how did we do that? How were we able to get everyone to work together? And if there's anything that you take from today's webinar, I think the most important thing is how you build your team. And your team can be local, or it can be multi-center, and you can be collaborating with people all over the world, within your country, within your state, your province. It really depends on what resources you have locally. What we've done, and this has taken a long time to develop, is we've really built a culture of resident-led research at the Heart Institute. And so we have a program where trainees from the day they arrive are involved in recruitment, design, data safety monitoring boards. They get formalized training, and this has enabled us to complete a number of projects, as I'm going to show you. And so what does that curriculum look like? So in the first year of cardiology fellowship, all C1s at the same time take a full month off. And during that time period, they get didactic lectures on study design, basic statistical analyses, regulatory framework. They learn how to do an ethics submission. And actually, a lot of these lectures are done by trainees. So trainees who are doing a PhD in epidemiology are teaching the fundamentals of analysis. In phase 2 and phase 3, they have up to 6 months of elective time to design a project, work with a mentor. They have objective goal-directed rotations. So every month they do research, they have to submit what they're going to do. I sign off on it and say, yeah, that's enough for a month or not. And then they get evaluated on whether or not they completed that in their month. And then the third phase is they have to demonstrate competency. And this is either through publications or presentations. For those people that want to be clinician scientists, we have a CIP track, so they can get a PhD or a master's degree. And the mentoring really extends beyond just research. We spend a lot of time matching trainees with mentors to make sure that your mentor is helping you not only do your research, but helping you in your clinical development in your career. A lot of the trainees that work with me, they do their first stent with me. They do their first night of call for intervention with me. And so you're not just helping them develop their research career, you're helping their clinical career, you become friends with them. And hopefully these people become lifelong friends, colleagues, and continue to collaborate with you. And we've done research on this. So Jeff Marbach, who's actually a complex PCI fellow at Beth Israel right now, has published on this. We dramatically improve the research output of the trainees. That's not surprising. If you teach people how to do things properly, they're more likely to do it. But this takes time. And so, really working on teamwork to complete these projects is essential. There's only so many hours in a day. You can only do so much. And whether that's local or collaboration outside, depends on what your local situation looks like. Identifying people who complement your skill set is both cost effective and I think really important for completing research. Team members can be complementary, so you don't have to know how to do Bayesian statistics, how to do a sample size calculation on RCT, how to run a specific assay, but you need to be able to find people that can do that, and you need to be able to network to identify, kind of what are the gaps in your team and what do you need to do to be more productive. And that helps increase productivity exponentially. As I've collaborated with more people, will lean on me for some things or will involve me in projects that I otherwise wouldn't have been involved with. And so that simply increases your productivity as you increase your network. It also makes for a collaborative and positive work environment. When you're working with people that you get along with, you're more likely to work longer, you're more likely to enjoy the research work that you do, and you're more likely to be more productive as a team. And I'll say this as a little bit of a reality check. It doesn't always work out, and you can't hesitate to change teammates. So if you have a nursing coordinator who's not being productive, trainees who aren't being productive, and conversely, if you're a trainee who has a mentor and you're not getting what you need out of that, don't hesitate to find other mentors or change mentors if things aren't working out. And again, lots of examples of how we've used this to be productive. Jason Roberts trained with me. He's currently in Hamilton. He published a Lancet paper when he was here. Ronan Mays started the Capital Chill trial, which is 34 versus 31 in therapeutic hypothermia. That's probably going to be out in JAMA shortly. Dr. DeSanto is doing an 1,800 patient RCT looking at anticoagulation after radial artery occlusion, and of course the Do-Re-Mi trial. So we've been able to do this successfully over years as we've built this program. One of the things I've really learned that helps research productivity is synchronizing clinical and research workflow. And what do I mean by that? If you can enable that your clinical work and your research work is integrated, you can dramatically increase your productivity. And we've had a lot of success with generating registries. And so I'm going to give a shout out to Dr. Trevor Smart, who's joining the group at the Mayo Clinic. When he started here as a fellow, he developed a workflow for our patients that got revascularization such that all of the routine data that we need for research is collected as part of workflow. So I was in the cath lab today. I just finished cathing this afternoon. When I finish a case, my fellow fills out our local registry, collects all of the baseline characteristics, procedural information related to that patient. And then that patient automatically gets seen in a fellow-led clinic at 1 year where we collect all of the clinical outcomes. So we'll have everything about that patient from the time they came in to their revascularization procedure to 1 year clinical outcomes, and it's all part of clinical care. This can be done for minimal cost, so it costs us only a couple $1,000s to set up the servers, and we're able to do QI, we can do volume reports for individual operators, we can do outcome reports for individual operators, and we're able to use that for clinical research. And we're certainly not the first people to do this. I always cite this paper. This is the TASTE trial. So when I was a fellow, thrombectomy was a big deal for primary PCI. We thought it reduced mortality. And so Hamilton, which is a big research group here in Canada, got an industry-sponsored grant to do a large multi-center RCT. And the Swedish group that runs the SCAR registry actually did a nested trial. And so everybody in Sweden, because they were collecting all the data routinely, they were able to enroll 7,000 patients 2 years before they were able to do an RCT with large industry funding. They were able to show no change in mortality at a cost of $50 per patient. So they ran a large New England trial for $300,000 across the country by just nesting their research into their clinical workflow. And we've done similar things here, where now, because we've been doing this for 5 years, we have over 40,000 cases recorded. We can tell you exactly how patients do over the course of 12 months. And we've done a lot of observational research out of our registry. And now very quickly, I'm just going to touch on study design and some of the pearls or insights that I've gotten having worked through and made mistakes over the years in designing studies. First and foremost, take a problem or needs-based approach to your research. If you see one sarcoid patient a year, don't do research on cardiac sarcoid. Study the problems that you see every day and the clinical questions that you see every day. And that's simply because if you're dealing with this question or problem every day, other people are. And you also have the patience and the volume to study the problem that you're looking at. You want to be pragmatic in your trial designs. Make sure that enrollment isn't too strict, and make sure that the outcomes that you want are easy to adjudicate. I do a lot of industry-sponsored research, and I do a lot of investigator-initiated research. The industry-sponsored research has every quality of life scale known to man. They collect innumerable data points, and it becomes almost cost prohibitive to do this type of research. The reality is you're largely powered for your primary endpoint only. So collecting too much data or collecting too many data points can both increase cost and time. Randomization, the most powerful tool that we have in clinical research, costs zero. So if you're doing a study of routine clinical care and you randomize the patients, you can get incredibly powerful data for essentially free. Small grants are easier to get than big grants. I'm not as familiar with the funding environment in the United States. It's incredibly difficult to get large grants in Canada to do research, but you can get small grants, and small grants add up, and you get a few small grants and you can get a big project done. And so making sure that you're still applying for those $5,000, $10,000, $25,000 grants so that you can get your projects done, you're just much more likely to be funded. And this is self-evident, but be cheap. pay for nothing that you or your research team can do. And my students will attest to this. So you want to make sure that if there's something that you can do for time, that you take the time and you do that, and that you're not spending any money that you can't afford to spend, especially in this low cost or high competitive environment for funding. You want to make sure that you use your funding as efficiently as possible, and that you're efficient in your research endeavor. And so using this method, we've over time, and Dr. Alkhouli and I have talked about this, it takes time to build these programs. We've been able to develop a very successful program where we're able to identify trainees that are interested in research, groom them, help them to kind of develop the career that they want. And along the way, I think do some pretty impactful research with relatively low resources. Thank you very much for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think that was absolutely terrific. I think a very important question is, what if a more mature individual wanted to sign up for your training program who wasn't Canadian, who maybe lived in, I don't know, Rochester, Minnesota? Would you have openings, or would that be an issue?
Yeah, so the training program.
So he said that's the issue. Goodness sakes, that wasn't exactly the answer that I wanted. Ben, you need to be sensitive.
Yeah,
the training program that we do is actually part of our cardiology residency training program. So we've never, I must admit, I've never thought of it as something that someone would take from outside. That's certainly something that, I'd have to consider. We are starting to talk about collaborating with other training programs to make this more standardized across a multitude of residency programs here. So if you're a cardiac surgery resident in our institute, you don't get this program. If you're an internal medicine resident, unless you take your research rotation during that time, which some residents have done to participate in it, you don't get to participate in this program. So, the way we've designed it right now, I must admit it's not designed for people to join it from the outside. It's an interesting thought. And that's something that certainly we would have to consider, but it's not something that I've considered in the past. To be fair, no one's asked.
You're always going to get the unexpected questions from Dr. Holmes, Ben. Many questions come to mind. And I think the first thing that came to mind is, I think somebody from the NIH is going to watch this recording and they ask you to vet all the money that they spend on all the grants. And we're going to end up saving a lot of money. But it's amazing how much you could achieve with limited resources. So, well, just for people who are on the call, please feel free to put questions. I just started seeing the questions now. So put them in the chat box. It's an open format. Really nothing is needed before you don't have to know anything about much. You could just say the questions that come to mind about how to do research with limited resources. But Ben, one of the main theme that many questions came around that is, when people are saying where you have built a curriculum where people are, they can go through the training, but let's say how many of those trainees are interested in what you described as a clinician scientist, and how many of them are interested in a short-term project or two, and they just want to have something on their CV and carry along? And how do you incorporate both in your program?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, that pyramid I'm showing you all the trainees that are, for all intents and purposes, becoming clinician scientists. So these are people that are going to have academic careers, I think, being clinical trialists or translational scientists, and hopefully having research programs of their own. That funnel is certainly not comprehensive. So I had this conversation earlier this week. I'll have trainees come and say, I'll get an email and they'll be, Dr. Hibbert, I read a paper of yours. I'd love to do research. Can we meet? And so, I'll meet with them. And I think we have to tailor the research experience for what that trainee needs. And I think that's part of what mentoring is. So I'll meet with the trainees, kind of get a sense of where they are, both in their research training. So what have they done before? What skill sets do they bring to the team? What are their expectations? So what are they hoping to get out of it? And I'm very blunt with people. There are some people that say, I just want to get into cardiology residency. I'd be happy to get my name on a few papers so I can have some lines on my CV, and I'm happy to move on. And we tailor that experience to how, to what those trainees need. So if someone comes to me and says, I really just want to get into cardiology fellowship, well, then I'll say, look, I'm going to pair you up with someone who is an experienced researcher in my group. You can help contribute to that project, whether it's data collection, filling out case report forms, reviewing papers, and you'll participate in the project and you'll get your name on the project, but you're not necessarily going to lead the project. If someone comes to me and says, Ben, I want to be a clinician scientist, I love research, I want to have a research program, I want to develop that, that's a very different experience. So often, everyone starts working on projects collaboratively with people who are a little bit more advanced in their research training, but the goal is very quickly to transition those people to their own projects. And again, you and I have talked about it. Everyone starts when they come working on a case report, because that helps someone learn how to write a paper. They learn how to use RefMan. They have to write a cover letter. They have to make a profile in their editorial manager, and just learning that process, I think helps them. Then they work on a project. So they, are kind of a second, a third, or a fourth author on a project where they're contributing to data collection, study design. They learn a little bit about statistical analysis. And then if that's going well, and they haven't been scared off by working Saturday nights and Sunday nights on their project, then they get their own project. And that often starts with an observational project. So they'll get a data set that they can do an analysis on, and it may or may not lead to a paper, depending on what the outcome of that analysis is. And then, the trainees that stick around, those are the people that, have the fire in their belly. And then those people start, getting their own randomized clinical trials, and we start taking them through the process of learning how to design a trial, how to run a DSMB, how to get a clinical events committee together. And so, when I say it takes time, if your goal is to build a program, that takes time. It's really hard to do that in a 12-month period. If you just want to get research experience, be exposed to it, have an understanding of how it works, maybe publish some papers, then I think that can be done in 12 months, working with kind of more experienced mentor. So I think, to answer your question, it's really important to upfront know what the goals of everyone is, both the mentor, the mentee, and make sure that you're tailoring that experience. The other thing I do sometimes is I'll meet with someone and I'll realize that, working with me isn't the best thing, because what they want to do is very different than what I do. So if someone comes to me and says, I want to be a pulmonary hypertension expert, and I want to do basic science. Well, we have Duncan Stewart in Ottawa, who's a world famous pulmonary hypertension expert. And so kind of tailoring that, referring that trainee to someone whose mentorship might better align with their goals, I think is important. And so, I think really tailoring it to that trainee is really important to make sure that everybody's getting out of the experience what they set out to get out of it.
Can you tell us a little bit, what is the track record, say at 5 years from leaving the program? One of the metrics that in the United States people talk about is how many of the people in training actually go to an academic type of job. But now that could be in a practice that is doing good clinical research, and how many of them go to a practice where they're concentrating on having done 75 microclips and a volume-based thing. What is your track record in that? Have you followed that?
We absolutely. So that's a great question. This was not planted, I promise. So we actually have the 10-year outcomes of this program, and we have actually completed that analysis. And so that's getting ready for submission. So Dr. Marbach has that data. And so we've looked at it. So we don't have the type of practice that they go to, but we have their research outputs. And so we've been able to demonstrate that there's a dramatic improvement in how many first and last author papers they publish, how often their research is cited, the impact of the papers that they publish. And so there seems to be a durable increase in their research productivity, even into early career. So we have 5 years into early career worth of data. We don't have beyond 5 years, but there is a significant increase in the productivity from a research perspective of the people that have gone through this program. And so Mike Froschel, who's the program director, and this is actually, I don't want to pretend that this is all my idea. This was his brainchild. I'm simply the person that executes it. He has been adamant that implementing this there needs to be metrics or outputs. And so he's actually the senior author on that paper. And so hopefully we'll have that published shortly. But we do have good data that it increases research productivity. Our program also trains community cardiologists. So again, we have a large catchment area, about 1.5 million people that get serviced by one heart institute. And so we do train community cardiologists. Some of our mandate is to train, as you alluded to, just people that do good clinical medicine. But I think that the average research output, as you'll see once we publish that data, is dramatically higher.
So
That's
Ben,
tremendous.
I think this is great insight. We've had 6 or 7 questions came through so far. So maybe we'll try to address a couple of them to start. A common question is, I am in a community program. I really want to do research. Learning statistics is hard and expensive. Case reports, I'm told, are useless. What should I do? Where do I start? I don't have the program director you have. Is there a way? I mean, we get inspired by your talk, but what do we do tomorrow to change, the current situation?
Yeah, so that is a great question, and it's obviously difficult. I'll say it this way: the playing field's not level. If you're, in a world-class institution like the Mayo Clinic, obviously you have access to tremendous clinical researchers. You have access to data sets. You have access to statistical support. And obviously people that are in programs that maybe are a little bit more community focused might not have access to those resources. So, recognizing that you might not have all of the opportunities that people do at those types of institutes, is important. That being said, there is an opportunity to reach out and communicate with people that do the type of research that you want, and to get access to those data sets. So one thing that we haven't done yet, and we're in the process of doing it, we're going to make the Do-Re-Mi database entirely open access. So everyone is going to have access to that data set, so they can do if you have an idea and the data is available, you can do that analysis and publish it. And there is a movement towards publishing open access data. You can also start by doing systematic reviews and meta-analyses, where you combine data that is also publicly available. And you certainly have to learn those statistics. And so if you reach out to people that do that type of work, I have found, anyways, in my experience, that people are more than willing to collaborate and share knowledge in the academic community. Nobody's paying their bills doing academic research. We all do this because we love it. And so I have found that, and I got people that emailed me after the New England paper and asked for the data set, and we're giving them the data set. They have a very specific question they want to answer. If we have the data available, I'll give it to them so they can do that work. I had residents from around the United States email me and say, they want to look at different aspects of that trial. I'm more than happy to share that data. And so I would say, pick research projects that you can do with data that's available. If you don't have that data available, reach out to the people that do it. You'd be surprised how often people are willing to help. If you're willing to put in the work and you're willing to deliver on your end, I think people are willing to help you. And lastly, when you're done your community residency program, if your interests are academic, I would try to get to a program where you have kind of those mentors to work with. I was super blessed. So I had a tremendous mentor. I started when I was a medical student. I went into medicine to be a family physician. I was from a small town. The only type of physician I was familiar with was a family doctor. And then I did my cardiology rotation, fell in love with cardiology. And my CBL tutor was like, you should work with Ed O'Brien. He's a interventional cardiologist who does research. If you're interested in research, you should work with him. I started working with him. And that was when I was a first-year medical student. And, I did 10 years of residency, and I was in his lab the whole time doing work. And so getting to a place where you can find a mentor that shares common interests with you, if you can, I think is helpful. But I think all of those approaches, doing the type of research where data is freely available, reaching out to people who have data, and then lastly, trying to get yourself into a position where you can find a mentor that shares those interests with you, I think are all ways to improve your research outputs.
So maybe, Ben, that will take me to Dr. Holmes now. I think this is a great segue to the next question about mentorship. But I want to make a quick comment first. because we all get a lot of requests to do research or collaborate on research. So I would say make a serious and genuine effort. Don't just send a generic email to people. I hear this frequently from, company leaders, and even like there was a lecture recently that I looked at the Nobel Prize winner. One of them has a lab, and he said he only looks at postdoc applications if they refer to something specific in the lab. They say, well, I want to work with you on this particular project. I have, this interest. And also he said, he looked at people who try to develop some kind of skill. So if you tell me, I want to do research, I don't know how to write, I don't know how to do analysis, I don't know how to do case reports, I don't know how to do pretty much anything, it will be difficult for busy people to, catch up with you. You will find people locally who can help you. But if you want to really make an effort to go across institutions and look for busy mentors, then you have to do two things. You have to look exactly about what they're doing and be familiar with the interest, and then try to develop some kind of a skill that would be useful to the team, where they would feel, more and more inclined to partner with you and include you in the team. But that takes me to the next question, to Dr. Holmes, about mentorship. I mean, I think there's nobody who can answer this better. But mentorship is not an easy thing. And I think people underestimate how much of an undertaking it is to claim that we can mentor somebody. I think it's essential for our professional growth and for us to learn also from the mentees. But I don't think somebody can mentor 10, 20, 30, 40 people the way we see it now. But I want to learn from your experience. What does mentorship mean to you? How do you foster an environment that allows everybody who's looking for a mentor to have a mentor?
I think that's a great and terribly important question. There are other related questions on moving from being a mentee to a mentor. And that's a whole another series of things. I think in terms of a mentor, those characteristics that you need to have, I think number one, to identify what the specific needs are of the person that comes to you. We talk about the fact when we give lectures, we need to give a lecture to identify what the audience needs are. So in talking with people about their mentorship possibilities, when they come to you and see that they're interested, what are their needs? And that would focus along the lines what Ben has talked about, that you can get a good sense of what they have done and what their interests are and help to channel those. That's the first thing. The second thing is you need to make sure that you make the time to make that happen. If you don't make the time to make that happen, it doesn't matter. It's not going to work. So you need to define what their needs are. You need to give them time. Number three, you need to decide what the things are that you're really interested in. Now that's a funny thing to say. That would be the questions that you are interested in answering, not for your sake, not for your career, but for the field. And so the mentor needs have to say, gosh, this is an important thing. I think that's something that you could build your career around. That'd be a pretty neat thing, to be identified as a mentee for a program that they could start and then work along the lines of continuing to work with you, then to develop their own career. It's terribly important, that relationship between the mentee and the mentor. There are a lot of different things that can complicate that, but the mentor has to be pushing for the mentee to succeed. You want them to succeed in something that they are interested in, that will help the field and help them grow in the field to learn. That's a crucial piece of information. The mentee should not grow up to do your bidding on everything. That's a really serious error. And you see that time and time and time again. We've seen that here, and it always leads to really bad things, because then the mentee never has a chance to show his or her own sort of stuff and develop a career on their own. And that is something that you, the mentor, have to recognize, that process is essential. So you're going to bring them along. You're going to help identify what their needs are, help identify those projects that might be of interest to them, grow them up to do that, give them the opportunity to do that, and they then, you turn them loose. During that time, feedback is terribly important. This is not something that you do every 6 months. This is not something that you do sort of at the end of each year or at the end of training. You can't do that. That doesn't count. You have to be working with them, whether it's on clinical projects that you're interested in or research projects that you're interested in. I think that is an essential part of it. And you had to identify and fit into their needs and then make it happen for them. It has nothing to do with you anymore. It's all for them. Those would be my thoughts on that. It's terribly interesting, terribly wonderful. So as Ben has talked about, he grows up his kids. Okay, then you grow up your kids, and then they do much better than you've ever done. Much better than you've ever done. I can tell you this. There's a guy that I was involved with from the mentorship side of things. It's a funny guy. I think he's quite a good person, very talented. And so you then talk about things, and then all of a sudden, you've got somebody that's much better than you are. Think about that. Who has a broader vision, but based on some of the discussions that you had. But then he then, in this particular case, guy that I share an office with, I don't know, you might know him. His name is Alkhouli. You then say, you grow up somebody to make them much better than you ever were.
Yeah, I don't think that is. I think that's just very
No,
nice.
no,
What a
no,
compliment.
no,
What a
wait, I
compliment.
don't mean that.
I think-
I didn't mean that in a.
I think that
bad way.
has made my year, not my day. But I don't think it is. It's reality. It's just kind of you, Dr. Holmes. But
We
but
voted. We voted in this office, and I voted, and I won. So
okay,
my opinion there. Sorry, you lost
I-
yet again. So anyway, I think that
I
the
just
whole
want to,
mentorship thing is an incredible thrill. All of you on this call should want to grow up to be a mentor. Gosh,
That, Dr. Holmes, this is a very profound, insight, and I think we shifted a little bit, but I think it's a very important shift about mentorship. You know, what I realized from Ben work, there are a lot of unique aspects. First, it was unmet need, as you described, right? You have to find what will be useful to the field. For mentees, they all want to, grow their career, but can you find something like what Ben said? It was a question that was asked in the ICU, right? During rounds that led to a clinical trial that will lead to many more papers and to a future bright career for this young fellow who started that with you, right? So I think the unmet need is a critical one, because we somehow have gotten ourselves to live in an environment where we could go in circles about useless things and population produce, and it's not helping anybody, just going on the CV, right? But I think that's one very, very profound aspect. The other thing is, I think that you cannot underestimate how much you could learn from the mentees. I mean, they have so much complementary knowledge, so much different drive. But the question to Ben, that based on Dr. Holmes, is how do you, I mean, you said that they became your friends, they became, it's sort of like a lifelong relationship. That's why I said you probably can only take on so many mentees, right? You cannot mentor 50 people and give them the same attention, same care. But the question is, what are the prerequisites of somebody who wants, let's say somebody is looking up to Ben as a future mentor. He's in Ottawa today, and in 5 years, he's like, this is the guy I want to work with, but I want to develop myself to enough. I want to, gather those traits or those skills that would allow me to be the best mentee. What are those characters that you have identified in your experience that made the best mentees? we could keep Trevor out of the
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah, I think it was incredibly insightful what Dr. Holmes said there. Mentorship, I think mentorship is a two-way street. So you have to be a good mentor, and mentees have to be good mentees, right? People get as much out of the relationship as they put into it. And again, it's funny. So even in Ottawa, I will have staff people that will come and sit with me and say, Ben, you have all these trainees that work with you. How I need training. I've literally had staff people say this. I need trainees to work with me because I need them to do my work. And I always say, if you just want people to work with you so they do your work for you, no one's going to come work for you. You have to take a interest in the person. You have to identify what their needs are. At the end of the day, you have to like the person. And again, I've seen so many toxic mentor-mentee relationships where, and it's largely mentors, and they tend to be brilliant researchers. It's not that they're bad at their research job, but they view that relationship as a means to an end. I'm with Dr. Holmes on this. I hope all of my mentees are better than me. I hope they outproduce me, and I'm going to take credit for everything that they did. And you have to take pleasure and satisfaction in the accomplishments of your mentees. From a mentee standpoint, you have to put into that relationship as well. It's a two-way street. I benefit tremendously from having these great mentees. They will recruit patients at night. They will fill in case report forms. I am more productive because I have people that will do that work for me. And so, if you're a mentee and you think someone's going to give you opportunity, someone's going to give you the opportunity to run a clinical trial, but you're not going to put in the hours, you're not going to collect that data. I think you're going to be sorely mistaken, because I think people won't invest in you. So I think it's a two-way street. And again, I don't pretend that, I haven't benefited from it. I have, I've had tremendous clinical trainees that make my life easier. I have incredible research trainees that have made my life easier. I'll leave Trevor out of it, and I'll use a different trainee I have. So Richard Jung just finished his PhD with me. When he came to work with me, he did his MD PhD. He was green. He didn't know how to write papers, didn't know how to do statistical analysis. He's essentially an independent scientist now. He can identify a problem, write a paper. He's got many more years of training coming up. And so I'll have the benefit of working with him over time. And so these are symbiotic relationships. And not every relationship, just like in life, in your personal life and your romantic relationships, not everyone is a match. And so I've worked with people, and, personality wise, we're not a good fit. I am, and you have to know yourself as a mentor. I am not that mentor that's going to tell you exactly what to do step by step to lead you to your publication. I'm happy to sit with you and talk about the design of the study. I'm happy to create the environment, but my mentees tend to be very self-motivated people. There are some mentors that are very, prescriptive in how they lead, and they probably work better with mentees that need a little bit more guidance. And so, I think it's just like relationships in real life. You have to, find people you mesh with, find people you get along with, and those are the most productive relationships for both the mentor and the mentee. But I think what Dr. Holmes said was very prophetic. You have to identify people that are good mentors, because not everyone is. And as a mentor, you have to take joy and pride in the success of your mentees. And I find that very satisfying. I agree with you. You can't do it to 50 people. And so, you have to, it's just like you can only look after so many patients. You can only do so many angiograms. You have to do what you can do with the time that you have allotted, and pair people up with other mentors. There are other people out there that can do it. So, if you meet with someone and you don't have the bandwidth to mentor them, then making sure that you provide them with that opportunity by hooking them up with someone who can.
Good. Mohamad, could we then potentially shift a little bit and talk about research strategies that might be helpful for the audience? We've talked about the fact that we're both all three of us are in academic institutions with lots of different resources. There are many issues that can be addressed after you have left fellowship. to work with people that you trained with. And I think that we have underutilized the opportunities that internet brings. So one could imagine the fact that if you have, when you're in training, identified something that was a problem, whether that be a sort of access or whatever it is, or how you give medications, then to network with people that you trained with or have gotten to know through ACC or Sky or something like that. And you then develop a focused registry of people that are identifying that same problem. And you develop a data form that can be filled out no matter whether you're in a community hospital someplace or whether you're in a university tower someplace, that you can answer a clinically important question by virtue of raising the voices and the profile in the community, in the clinical community. And you can do that with internet. And so there are opportunities like that that are fantastic. I'll give a specific example. At least in interventional stuff in the United States, there's sort of it's not a blog, or I'm not sure, but Mohamad would know the name of it, that goes around that 50 or 60 people read and then answer questions. And it's sent to some standard place. You could use something like that to say, I have this specific question. Are people interested in studying that? And you could do that with a network of your colleagues, the people that you trained with, and then you could get that group together on the internet and identify patient clinical issues. And that means a whole lot. That may not be New England Journal. That's okay, but it addresses a clinical need for a problem that you face every day. For example, you could have potentially done your study on the internet to people that you have trained and sent along a questionnaire on what do you do to support hemodynamics. Relatively straightforward forms. All the people that trained with you or people that are in the societies, the Canadian Society or ACC or Sky, and identify a group that then gives you a community or a whole region or a whole nationwide approach to the issue and develops. You're not going to have a huge exhaustive case report form. I realize that. You're going to have to be focused on a specific thing. But I think that's an opportunity that people need to be aware exists. And it's very, very useful.
Absolutely. That was actually my next point, Dr. Holmes, to talk about democratization of how do we scale this out, right? I mean, we don't, a lot of people, all of the questions actually are coming. We're in a community place. They only care about clinical productivity. Nobody cares about research, right? So I think rather than having an artificial community of people, like I say, these are people who should do research or something like that. If you are self-motivated, we could network, as Dr. Holmes. There's no better time to do this than now. And actually, our DRT paper, led by Trevor, who's a successful example of Ben mentorship. Trevor, I think I'll just take a minute to mention this because people should know how that project worked out. Trevor matched you for structural fellowship about 1.5 years ago. After he matched, he sent an email like, I'm coming as one of your fellows, just want to introduce myself, hi. And I said, yeah, let's just have a quick chat. I've heard about your accomplishment. Do you want to do some research together? And he wasn't even a fellow, right? Remember, Ben? It was me, you, and him on the phone. And I was like, what can we do together, even though we never met? We never had any, but we all are motivated and we wanted to do some research. And then we came up with the idea of gathering device-related thrombus with Watchman. We talked to Dr. Holmes, who had more experience with the field. We developed this data collection form that went to many, many sites, and not everybody took up the opportunity, right? I mean, 37 sites did, and the vast majority of them were not the academic institutions. They were the highly motivated individuals who are in private practice or research, people who were just interested in research. And that became a JAC paper that is leading to further, advancement in the registry, where we will have many more papers coming out of it. And that actually now inspired us to even have other registries like this, Like, let's identify 10 clinically relevant questions that cannot be answered easily with these, other available databases. And let's make a multi-center registry. It takes a lot of work and it needs a champion, but you could do that. I mean, whatever Trevor did with that project could have been done from the smallest, tiniest program in the US. He didn't have to be at Mayo Clinic to do it. Actually, he didn't use any of Mayo resources to publish that paper. That paper was collected by, we had a few meetings. He collected the data, and the statistical analysis was done by a research collaborator who's also another BIM trainee. So, so you see, I mean, like, a lot of things can be done, but you have to be self-motivated. And I still remember my first publication was a case report that nobody wanted to look at. It got rejected numerous times, but it was a clinical thing that I observed in the CCU. Was a patient who had the dialysis fistula, decompensated his aortic stenosis, and died. And it was a pretty pathetic case, but I was very interested in it. Nobody else was. And I kept pushing for it, and that just introduced my interest to the field. So I think you have to be self-motivated. Start with the tiniest thing you could do. Fuster will tell you if you talk to him about research, he said, even do a review article. Just spend a year trying to know how to do that if you have no other resources. So don't be helpless. There are so many resources that you could tap into, but you have to be motivated and know a little bit about what you want to do. But maybe Dr. Holmes, maybe we should talk about some initiative out of this webinar and our prior conversations. Initiative where those people who have interest in research and have some experience can have a virtual cloud-like institution where all of the unanswered questions can be posted to. It could be a community where everybody would say, well, I could contribute this, I could contribute that. And then, chemistry would work out, and some people will be out, some people will be in, but eventually you will get a group of people who can lead, who can lead a very successful research initiative.
I think that's a very broad, wonderful opportunity to develop. I think that as you think about that, I think that that is the sort of broad initiative that you could start with a single project, like Trevor has done, and then build upon that and get to the stage then that might develop into a national registry initiative. And that would be the sort of thing that ACC might be interested in as part of the Scientific Interventional Council, or SCAI, or American Heart, or the Canadian Cardiovascular Institute. That's the sort of thing that can grow into that. But you need to start out with a small project that is well-defined, and you need to start out with a success. After that, then, but you could model it for a specific clinical problem. So, for example, the problem that you're working at, Ben, I know, is the use of lytic therapy to prevent radial artery occlusion. Now, that's a big deal, but there would be other institutions around and groups around the United States that could get on board with something like that. Relatively straightforward. What you need is you need to have somebody that looked at it. You need to have somebody with the drug that can be used for it. You need to have a common protocol that is pretty straightforward. And then you need to have assessment of the patient at 30 days, and that's part of your clinical flow of patients anyway. That's one of the things that Ben mentioned. You want a protocol that is part of the clinical flow. You don't want a protocol that says they have to come back at every 3 days or every week or every 2 weeks or something like that. It has to match your clinical flow. But identifying a couple of projects like that, 2 or 3 projects that you looked at and said, this is a clinical need. This is something where we can succeed. We can gather the data and answer an important clinical question. I think that that's a great strategy and a great plan going forward.
Awesome. Ben, do you want to do some closing remarks? We're only a couple minutes towards the end of the hour.
Yeah, no, well, again, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to come and present. I think there was a lot of good ideas, and I'm glad you brought up the DRT paper, because I think that is a tremendous example of doing a super impactful paper using limited resources through collaboration, hard work, perseverance. And I think that is a great example of the type of thing you can do no matter where you are. And like you alluded to, I think, one of the barriers that people have is just sending that first email and reaching out, like Trevor did with you. And I think, you identify someone that does something that you want, reach out. And I think you will find and I hope you guys would agree with me, I think you find in the academic community, people do this because they love it, and people want to collaborate. Everyone's busy. And so, they might not get back to you right away, but people want to collaborate. People want to participate in these types of projects. And so if you're a trainee or a junior staff person who's just starting out, I think you knock on, 100 doors and you hope 10 of them open. And if those are 10 good doors, I think you're going to find success. And so a lot of this is, I think it's feasible. I don't think it's easy. And I think a lot of it is related to how much work and effort you're willing to put into it. But I think there's lots of examples of that. And there's probably some things we should follow up on in terms of opportunities that we can avail ourselves of to kind of reach out, include people that are interested like this, and everyone benefits.
People like to be asked to dance. So to send around something, no, I think that's true. You get a good idea, a good clinical issue, then to send emails around or whatever method you do that and say, this is an important clinical thing. You've probably faced that in your own practice. Is that something that you'd be interested in developing a protocol that we could study? Wow. Asked to dance.
Yep.
I think that's the closing remark. People like to be asked to dance.
Absolutely. Well, this was very enjoyable. Thank you very much both for being with us today. It will be available on the online, and I'll post, when we have the link, I will post it on Twitter so people can go back and, look at it. But again, Ben, and I think we should follow up. I think a lot of other opportunities that we could make available for people, especially now. I think COVID had some advantages despite the catastrophic, sequelae of it, but some advantages of connecting people more and more. And I think we could make opportunities available with or without the scope of professional societies to many interested individuals.
Terrific.
Thank you.
It was great.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Thank you all.